Right, this is going to be another one of my donated discussions. It's only going to be a two-man one for this one. I'm here with Matt. So, Matt, what topic are we starting off with here? By the way, people don't know his main background is League of Legends, but like everyone, he watches a bit of CSGO on the side as well. So, what topic are we going to start with here, Matt?
Yeah,
Or
so
what ballpark are we in at least?
ballpark. I want to talk about the CS:GO major.
Oh,
And
okay,
like
yeah.
the ridiculous top 8 that we had.
Yes.
So in that kind of context, like, because I'm not a tournament watcher. Like, is that a normal occurrence? Like once in every 10 things you have this weird thing happen, or is that like special that like so many upsets were made and
I think that's probably the most extreme I've ever seen ever, Matt. Like even past majors where people said like the bracket wasn't good. Usually, like I'll give you an example. There's two classic examples. One would actually be that Starladder one, the last one, Astralis one, right? That bracket doesn't look that good, but that's just because one side of the bracket got upset. So there was a side of the bracket where Ents and Vitality were on one side, and they at the time were number 2 and number 3. They just lost the first round, right? That looks bad because it makes you semi-final wax. That was where the semi-final was a Vanguard, the team that later became Virtus Pro versus Renegades with like JKS and Asa and all that. Like that looks whack on paper, but like I say, at least the quarterfinals, like you could have had a better semi-final. The 8 teams that made the major playoffs, this last one I think is easily the worst I've ever seen. And then on top of that, the 2 best teams in the quarters was obviously Na'Vi and Cloud9. They both instantly lost. So that is actually to me like, that's not even just that the format sucks. Like I do have a lot of issues with the format, but that's probably the most extreme version of how bad it could go, if you know what I mean. That's like, you know, the old Murphy's Law, like anything that can go wrong will. That's like everything that could go wrong did, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And then like to what extent like do you put that into like a ranking system and stuff, or do you like ignore it completely? Like how like where do you put VP?
I see what you mean. Yeah, I will say it's tricky. Like, for example, it might actually surprise some people that even though I picked Virtus Pro to win the final and a lot of their playoff series, I even said to people, I don't think they're going to win another championship. And so, for example, I actually didn't think they would do well at the Blast tournament, etc. Yeah, the real problem is you have to include it because it's a massive tournament. It's a big set of results. Like, the results all have to count. The problem is it's so scuffed, it actually does sort of fuck up how you judge those teams. Like if you notice, when I did my world rankings, I always used to contain like a list of top ranked opponents you'd beaten as well. Like I used to show which other top 10 teams you'd beaten in that time span. That's where I think we've got to start including things like that. Essentially like a scuffed version of ELO, because that tournament, that's why you can't do it, because technically Virtus Pro are the world champions, but they're not the number 1 team in the world. I mean, what made that major suck as well, by the way, dude, is like, because it was so extreme and so many upsets happened. Normally what happens is this, it's like the Vanguard one at that major I told you about before, when there used to be a Vanguard with Jim and Buster and Kick It and that. If you remember that one, yeah, they were a nobody team, but they did get to beat Vitality. They did actually like win games against top teams. At this major, when you look at the end of it, Virtus Pro outsiders beat like Mouse and Heroic and like, you know, like that's not bad, but it's not the same on paper as if you'd have gotten to be the team that beat FaZe, or if they'd have beaten Na'Vi directly, or if they themselves had beaten Cloud9. Essentially, I think what fucked Outsider / Virtus Pro is all the upsets happening like sort of before they played, then the team that did the upset sort of like took away the scalps they would have won otherwise. I think that would have been a big deal to make this major seem epic, you know?
Yeah.
Like if they'd beaten Na'Vi, that would seem way more epic, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Did you have a similar vibe though as an outsider watching? Were you just sort of like, what the fuck is this? Or, do we just ignore these results or something, you know?
Yeah, basically. But like I followed your content, like you did all the stages and stuff. So like I kind of saw like this is like a bunch of crazy upsets, and like when Na'Vi lost, I'm like, well, am I watching the final even at this point and stuff?
Sure. I mean, I will say the reason why that one did suck, like I say, is it's one thing to have upsets, but the fact that every time someone did an upset, they didn't carry it on. So, for example, like when Bad News Eagles knocked FaZe out, they then just immediately lost themselves, and then Vitality got beaten by Ents, who then just lost themselves immediately. Then Na'Vi got beaten by Furia, who then just lost in the semi-finals. So it's like no one sort of, like, even if an underdog wins, you want them to sort of carry that. It's like you want them to almost take that person's storyline and they get to push it forward. So I always think if an underdog wins but then immediately loses, it actually just kills all the storylines, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Definitely not my favorite type of tournament, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What else then? What else do you want to talk about? Come on.
So I want to talk about Quesarado and Yuri.
Sure.
Do you think, because these guys, like, it's like Brazilian politics, and like he has, like, if these guys can get on another team, do you think you can see like a Brazilian team like be top 3 or top 5?
Oh, I do. Like, look, the one problem they're going to have on paper, in theory, is they've got to figure out the AWP position, because obviously AWP is like incredibly influential in World Counter-Strike. But if you just look at those two guys, like, let's be real. If each team in theory, in history, has like, you know, a star AWPer and 2-star riflers in an ideal world, those two can be your 2-star riflers. They are really good players. Like, I know Yuri had some times this year where he was a little bit more down, but Kovacevicd was a fucking banger this major. And actually, throughout the whole year in general, he was very strong. So, like, I do think it's what you're saying. Like, I actually know for a fact it's just politics that mean that they've had to keep that team the way they have. Like, I've even heard, here's one for you. You ready for a fucking gem? I've even heard that the actual MIBR guys could have had the Kovacevicd guy, I think even before Furia broke out. I think he was actually someone that they were even, like, thinking about as like a rising talent. It's just that the problem is, if you haven't noticed, people get kicked from the Furia org, but they don't seem to leave, if you know what I mean. Like, the implication, as far as I can tell, is it's one of those ones where, like, it's not as simple as just saying, like, I'd like to transfer. It's like, I get the vibe you sort of can't leave Furia, if you know what I mean. So at the moment, you'd need people to go to Furia, I think, to make the super team. But I'm with you. Like, if you just start with those two pieces, Kovacevicd and Yuri, you could make a number one team in the world, I think. I think those, Kovacevicd especially is fucking really sick. But they're both very strong players. And the key for me is they've now had enough years on LAN where they're sort of like battle tested, you know. It's just that you need like a great in-game leader, maybe a better AWPer. I mean, I think the AWPer they have is good. It's just I don't think Art knows how to use an AWPer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, because I started like following CS.
Were you a fan when you watched them play?
I think, well, I had the fan like when Art was popping off. I don't know how long ago that was.
That was a couple of years ago, but he used to have a pretty cool style player, sure.
But yeah, I want to see those. I want Kovacevicd, like see some of that stuff. It was really cool to watch him in the major.
Sure. The one problem I will say is this, though. For some weird reason, not just because they tried that weird lineup with MIBR with Stewie and Tarek those years ago. If you notice in general, Brazilians, for some reason, do seem like they'll only play with Brazilians, though. Like, I get the vibe, unfortunately, you can't just be like Team Liquid and buy Kovacevicd or something. Like, unfortunately, I just get the vibe they're all just going to stay together. So I think that's probably the one thing that might limit the Brazilian scene a bit, is that they don't seem really open to, like, international play.
Yeah.
But you can still make a mega team just out of Brazilian players. Let's be real. There's some really good talent there. In fact, even some of the newer generation talent's pretty sick.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll just transition into, so League World Finals is also like a similar situation happened with DRX.
It's pretty wild, wasn't it? How long have you watched League for, by the way? Professional League? Since what season?
I came in World Championship Season 3.
Oh, that's pretty early. Okay. Well, in that case, if you've watched all those years, wasn't this pretty wild for you? Like, look, dude, obviously, like, in theory, you've came in Season 3, you never saw the Taipei Assassins run in Season 2, but, like, I think this felt like the craziest run to the championship I've ever seen, mate. Like, I thought I was watching a movie, if you know what I mean. Like, I felt like they should have lost every single round, you know?
That was crazy, yeah. But, like, so I don't know, from an analytic point, like, my family went to see the World Finals because it was in San Fran.
Oh, okay.
For my brother.
Did you go as well?
Yeah, and I went as well.
Was it good? What was the atmosphere like?
Really awesome. Like the fan fest and stuff was really cool, hype and stuff. It was kind of like, you know, it's league fans as well, but they did a good job.
Oh, okay.
Like the whole, like the arena the arena was done really well. And the opening ceremony was pretty.
Was the atmosphere good? Like, were the fans good?
Yeah, we were kind of in the nosebleeds. I couldn't really tell. Like, the atmosphere, like the sound and the vibe was great.
Okay.
Not much more than that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, like, cause when I was watching the finals, like, it seems like DRX was like outdrafting them, and I was like calling the stuff, and like that Maokai pick, I was like, this is a great point for Maokai, and like it didn't happen. And it was like the last two games, I thought DRX, like, they won more like with their style and put their draft into their style, and they were beating SKT by doing that. And it was just like, people like talk about like mechanics like depth and Zeka, but like I don't know how much the coaching staff is in charge of like their drafts, and like, because I think they draft really smart.
Sure.
At least in the finals. That's the one I spend the most time watching. But yeah.
No, I'm with you. I actually thought that was an area in general, that team, like, over the tournament looked better and better and better. And also in the final, I have to say, like, I did get the vibe from SKT that, like, they tried to play it, like, they tried to draft and play too safe, if you know what I mean. Like, they thought they were just going to win. Whereas, like, as fucked up as it sounds, you should really just go for it whether you're the favourite or the underdog. Like, you've got to just believe that you have to be the better team, you know, come on. I still can't believe they won that final, though. It just felt inevitable T1 was going to win, didn't it? Yeah, were you pulling for DRX in the final?
Yeah,
were you pulling for him?
Yeah, me and my youngest brother were voting for DRX. And
right.
My brothers were SKT fans.
Fair enough.
Like, they're on the hype. So, but yeah, I like the way DRX was playing, and like I think like they used a lot of different picks in drafts, and you got to see the Kindred out of Kyosik. That was always cool because I like to see people put their champs in the game rather than playing the meta. That's what I like.
Sure. I mean, even playing like fucking Hecarim in Game 5 of the World Championship, you got to have some pretty big balls to do that, mate. Fair play, yeah. And even that Bard pick they did in Game 5, that was genius, mate. But again, you have to have pretty big balls to do that in the decider of a World Championship.
Yeah. I think the players are kind of calling for that too, right? It's like the coach. Like, I want to give the coach some credit. I don't know who the coach is, but like, it's a team sport. But yeah.
Actually, who was their coach? I wonder what he was called. Let me double check. I'm not sure, actually. Let me see if it's the right guy. Looks like they've changed coach, actually. That's weird. Let me double check who it was then. Let me just see. Who the fuck was their coach at the time? Oh, if you go on results, it'll show you. Right, let me have a look here. Oh my God, their coach was Song. The old school player, the one who coached FlyQuest years ago. Do you remember that in Immortals? Wow. And then Mowgli, the old jungler, was an assistant coach. Wow. You remember the guy who played for Vitality a few years back? Yeah. What an unusual coaching staff. Fair enough. Well, maybe they did a good job.
I think so, yeah.
The problem with coaching, if you've noticed in esports, is it's not only the hardest role to actually like judge, but like justifiably so, because the real problem is it's like what pieces you're working with, you know. Like a guy who might be an amazing coach for one group of people might just be like average as fuck for another, and then a guy who's like just bad with one group might be amazing with a different type. So I wonder with that particular, like maybe he just coaches better when it's like, you know, less well-known players or players that don't have a massive ego or something. Who knows what it could be. To be fair, LCS is pretty different to LCK.
Yeah.
I can imagine the vibe's pretty different.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, the Korean are going to coach differently than when he was in an NA.
The only thing is, though, mate, I can't lie. Even though, as a fan of history, it would be amazing to see Faker win like 4 Worlds and all, you know, like all that amazing stuff. At the same time, low key, part of me is actually sort of glad T1 didn't win, because if Faker had won, people would have acted like he just 1v9'd the tournament. And worse than that, obviously then Joe Marsh would have another World Championship, but this time actually under his fucking reign. So even though that's just a hater reason to not want it to happen, I'm just glad it didn't in the end. I don't have anything against Faker, though. He is a fucking godlike player.
Yeah.
And what amazing longevity as well.
Definitely, yeah. Crazy. I think like they did the whole like weird 10-man lineup that spring split. And then like they brought in all the rookies, and like SKT had like the prime rookies, and like all those other 4 players are terrific players on the team. So
it's sad, it's definitely sad for T1, because once they reach the final, like if you want to do like the narrative, historically they do sort of, like once they're in the final, they do deserve to win. They should have been the favourite, you know. Would have been a cool storyline. I actually also just feel a bit bad, quite frankly, for Zeus now, mate, because this is 2 times he's sort of fucked it now, because he definitely shitted it in that fucking MSI final. Oh, he was having some bad games for sure. Remember, this guy was supposed to be like the best player in the world.
Yeah.
In theory.
I don't remember the MSI final, but
it's because that was the one they had to play online, unfortunately, and that bin guy from RNG just had he just sort of like woke up and had a really great day, basically.
Yeah. I think that the top, like the King popped off as well, like super overperformed in the final.
Oh, he did.
That was like Zeus.
Fair play to him. King did just play inspired, yeah. I doubt he'll ever do that again, by the way. Like, spoiler, he will go down as a player where it's like, he won Worlds. Like, yeah, fair play, he did, but not by being the best. Although directly, I guess he was head-to-head. Fair play. All right, what else? What else is on your mind, mate? What are you thinking about the moment?
I don't know, ideas about the content. So the new shows you had, like Hot Take, Point Made, to say it correctly, yeah.
Yeah.
So I really like that one. That one's been pretty good. I think like for the whole By the Numbers with what's similar, it's been a different feel. I don't know, like I don't know. I feel like I'm missing Richard on by the numbers. So
Sure, but that's also, if you notice, like I've intentionally done by the numbers with like a different like sort of vibe to it for that reason.
yeah,
Like I knew that essentially, like pretty sweet. There's people out there who are like journalists I could have hired to just be like a bad version of Richard. But the difference is, it's like you say. I think if I'd have made it like a rip-off version of what Richard's by the numbers were like, you just have that same feeling, but it'd never go away. Whereas now it's more like, yeah, it'd be cool if I did a show with Richard, but the show I do with Semler is like a totally different vibe. So I think it's got its own audience. It's got its own sort of angle on it, you know. The reason I did the hot take one, though, is that's actually just something I thought was an obvious format, should have been done years ago, but no one's ever tried it. And like, spoiler, if you see how well it works in CSGO, I don't know when, but it feels inevitable I'll port that to like League of Legends or something at some point in time. It's just too good a format, isn't it?
yeah.
Once you sort of get the vibe, and crucially, you obviously have to have the right hosts. But if you had the right hosts, like that could be awesome in League of Legends too. I think it's some of the hot takes you could come up with there.
Yeah. I don't know. Would you have to region lock it, or
you can do whatever you want. No, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. I mean, in theory, if you did it in League, you'd probably do it more like, instead of just host, maybe you'd have a guest as the third person, so you could do it regionally, like you're saying, to make it interesting. Because obviously the downside of League is, unlike CSGO, like no one really does watch the game in the same way. Because the problem in CSGO is you just watch the big tournaments, you know every top team, don't you? Whereas like League's always like, there's always some region you don't give as much time to, understandably.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I think Kassad and Maui bring a great vibe to there. Like, they do know how to do the hot takes and stuff, and I just really like the show there.
Yeah, I think it's actually, it's one of those ones where it's like a sleeper. Like, I think it's actually going to end up being one of my best shows eventually. I think what will happen is it'll just need, like, here's my prediction. It just needs like 3 more months. In like 3 months, when we've put out like, I don't know, 10, 12 episodes or something, and we've had loads of like classic hot takes and fucking really funny ones that you can reference, and some will become memes and that. People, it's always like a lag basically before like people realize how good something is. I always say in esports, like, you're only ever judged on what you did, but it's like there's like a year or two lag. Like, if you notice, people like even other content creators, like people like Dorm and LS, they don't really go to the top of the scene in 1 year. It takes you sort of like maybe 3 or 4 to gradually climb up as you get more status and more sort of co-signed by people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you like explain like Semler's personality on By the Numbers, and like because he does like a lot of like host introductions and like talking stuff. Like, I don't know, you guys talk like it's a more, I don't know, I guess more conversation like than like the points made early by the numbers. Like, do you like that? Like, what was your idea for to have Semler do things?
I mean, my concept basically was, to me, the whole point of By the Numbers, this is actually an area where I actually think maybe me and Richard would disagree in the actual like purview of the show. Because if you notice, Richard almost had sort of like I would almost say he almost had like a weird like Protestant work ethic vibe to his version of By the Numbers, where if we talked too much about like the petty grievances or just drama, it was almost like he felt like we were shortchanging the viewer, and he would always try and make sure we had a segment where we just like did almost like analysis, if you know what I mean. Like, we just went over like this result, this team. Whereas if you notice, when I do it with Semler, it's more like I would say it's more of the petty grievances, it's more of the drama. It's more like, the reason I picked him to be the person is because he's another person who's been a friend of mine for a long time. So I knew conversationally we can hold a conversation for hours and hours about any topic. But also, I knew with him, I wanted someone else who, because he's basically got no connection to esports except that show and content with me right now, he's one of the only people in the scene who can actually say whatever they think about these topics. So even though right now some of his angles might be triggering people because they're a bit edgy, I think you need that for the type of show that By the Numbers is. Because to me, when By the Numbers was at its best, it had elements that were a bit like Four Horsemen. It was about calling out things that were happening in the scene, or holding people's feet to the fire, or roasting them when something silly happened, or sometimes getting into a really serious topic, like things about war or fucking sexual assault and things that like aren't just throwaway topics. So, like, the cool thing is you still get some of the elements of By the Numbers through For the Horsemen with Richard, but if you notice, I went a very different approach with Semler on it. And then also, me and Semler are just in a different place in our lives, so I think people might not like it. It's, you know, everyone's not going to like every flavour, but it's got its own, I'd say it has its own distinct flavour at this point.
Yeah, but like when you describe Richard as like Protestant, like he applied that in like when the calling out aspect. So like I'm very used to, like, when Richard talks about that type of stuff, it's like serious and like not vindictive, but like he has a lot of power behind his voice.
Sure.
But, like, Semler, it's just like talking about it, saying like this is wrong, like very casual. It seems like, I guess that's different. It's very different.
I mean, I would say Semmler's more just like his opinion. It's more like, does he like this move? Does he not? He does. Here's the thing. I think this is where a lot of people have gotten very confused about him as a person, actually, is because people want to gaslight him that he said terrible things about women's esports. He didn't at all, by the way, if you ever go and look. He said just like perfectly reasonable bunch of tweets, like, and then a couple of jokes. Because people want to gaslight him, the reason they're gaslighting him is what they're implying is the only reason he cares about that topic is because he has some problem with women. That's not the case at all, actually. The whole point is, to him, this is an area of esports he cares about. It's the idea of like, how is the circuit run? Where is the money allocated? What are the reasons why we're doing this? What is the messaging? How do we market esports? So to me, the women's esports stuff just plays directly into that. So I would say it's more that like he's someone where people just assume he's trying to be edgy, but I actually think he's trying to make like a real point when he makes comment on those sorts of topics, you know?
Yeah. I think I've seen similar around. Like he seems like a pretty honest person from like the content I've seen of him.
He's a person who genuinely, earnestly does care about esports, you know?
Authentic. Yeah. It was like so I quit Twitter a couple years ago, and I was never a fan of Reddit. So
you haven't missed much, mate.
Yeah. So a lot of my stuff, like I just get it like from you, and then if I really want to research something, I like look either outside or like find an article and stuff. But like, because I know like you and Richard were like, as you say all the time, like Richard's 100% actually right. It's ridiculous. So I mean, like you guys are great sources in that case.
Sure.
So. But yeah, so I guess I had a jumping off point, but
what was it around? What you usually do is you can always pick up. You just retrace your steps. What were you thinking about before?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get
what vein were we in?
Like the money and the Saudi, the similar. We're talking about like women. So it's like when you get into like boycotts and stuff, it's like really hard to boycott something when people are like, well, in this case, it's sports washing. So like, at what point do you put like, I don't want to support this anymore and boycott esports or something at that point? Or like,
I know what you mean. Like, basically, the real problem is this. In my opinion, there are two types of boycotts. And I actually think this is where a lot of the issues are coming from in this topic, both with, like, people like Frankie. Do they work with the Saudis? Do they not? I would even say people like, if you remember years ago, CSPPA, you remember when they did that, like, there was that online Blast game where they, like, delayed it for 3 hours because they had some problem with Blast having those voice recordings, right? Essentially, there's two types of boycott you can do. One is, I would say, pragmatic. You think to yourself, if we all agree to boycott this thing collectively, we can actually force them into this type of action. And so essentially we will get the result we want. Like that type of boycott is more what you're talking about. Essentially the idea, like if I'm outraged by something or I think it's morally wrong or I just can't support something like this, the premise is, if I quit doing it and if I tell other people for this reason, let's all quit it together, can we get the outcome we want? Which in this case would be something like the event isn't sponsored by this dodgy company or the dodgy company doesn't do those things against things of human rights that we're against or whatever, right? The problem I have is I don't think that one is plausible. Like, I don't think as a wider point in general don't forget gaming, mate. In culture in general, I don't think people collectively will boycott anything. Here's the key detail that they actually enjoy for a bigger purpose, like it's wrong or, I have to make them do what I want. And I'll tell you right now, I don't know if you know this. If you were watching League back in season 3, maybe you remember. Do you remember about 10 years ago, there was a famous version of Call of Duty where this happened, where what happened was all the fans, it might have been like Modern Warfare or something, I can't remember which one. It was like 10 years ago though. 10 years ago, right, there was a version of COD where loads of COD fans said something like, I can't remember if it's because they fired the producers of COD or the developers or the game was too expensive. There was something that fans were outraged by. And so they all did a thing online where they all promised and loads of signatures came on. And they all said, like, we're not going to, let's all agree not to buy COD. And then the joke, if you know back the story was, it still sold like record numbers. And it just later turned out, even loads of the people who said publicly and were leaders of the movement, like, don't buy it, boycott it, just lied and everyone bought it on release day and just started playing it. Because the problem is, at the end of the day, like, it's one thing almost as part of your identity to be like, well, I'm against X, so I'm willing to do Y. But like, at the end of the day, the person's core identity is they're a gamer. In this case, they're a Call of Duty gamer. So what are the odds they're really going to deny themselves Call of Duty forever, bearing in mind their boycott didn't work? They're not, are they? It's just something they said. And then when they came, when push came to shove, as they say, they didn't do it. So I would say the second type of boycott is where you just think it's morally wrong to do this thing or support it. And so even if you know it will never actually have any impact, you say, I'm going to boycott it no matter what. I just never will be associated. So the second example, like here's the difference between the two examples. Example one, where you say you're going to boycott it, but only if it works and like gets to the end result. That's like what someone like Frankie did. Like they just wanted a certain result. It didn't work out. And so then later they're almost like, well, why do I have to keep doing this then when it's going to hurt my career? It's like, because that's the point of the boycott. But for her, it clearly wasn't. It was just to get a certain end. Whereas to me, it's someone like Richard is the second one. Like, even if every single CSGO tournament till the end of time was owned by the Saudis, held in Saudi Arabia, even if they paid you like $1 million to do the event, I think Richard actually would still say no. He genuinely just thinks like, it's not about I can change their mind or what Saudi Arabia, the country, does in esports. I just won't work with them. So I just think there's very few people in the latter category. And I do, essentially, even though it might sound like a bit of a black pill, I don't think it's actually worth protesting or boycotting for the former reason, for the idea you'll actually get what you want. I don't think you can change it. Like if me, you, even if we got 10,000 people not to watch an ESL event, like the Saudis aren't going to sell the company. You know what I mean? They're not going to not be in Saudi Arabia. Like, I don't really think the boycotts work. So to me, the only reason to do it at this point is just on your own moral grounds. That's, that in itself pays for itself, if you know what I mean. Like, if you really can't do it, then fine. Make a public statement. Don't work with them. Don't watch it. But I will say, like, if you talk about like me and you as fans, we haven't really got much choice, have we? Because if we don't want to like support Saudi Arabia, for example, we just can't watch CSGO anymore, can we? We can only watch like Blast or something. So I will say on the consumer level, I think it's pretty hard to actually do anything about this. A lot of it sounds to me just like LARPing and playing at being political activists when we're not. We're just people sat at home playing games, What do you think on this topic?
Like, it seems like the levels of boycotts aren't like the correct terminology in this environment. So, like, I guess like when I would think like if you're going to participate in it, then you would at least like keep everything transparent and like you make sure that everyone knows that if you're watching with people that you know and stuff, that like this is supported by this government and like we don't. Like, this is what's happening. You just gotta like tell them that sports watching is happening, and you gotta know about it. And that way, like, you at least keep it. If the levers of power do change, you can at least like have people who know and support the same morals you do make a change when it's available.
I actually think, in theory, by the way, that's probably even more effective. Like, just awareness essentially is the best you can do at the moment, isn't it? Yeah. It's like I said, there's not really a mechanism to stop these people. Like they're sort of. Especially because here's the biggest problem people haven't thought about, right? I don't think talent can stop you at all unless all talent like quit at the same time, like LEC style. Like realistically, if like I'll give you an example. If Frankie says, "Well, I won't work for you," well then I just go, "Great, right, Fred, you want to work the event? Yeah, cool, you're in, right?" So that won't affect anything. But the bigger problem is, unlike every other business, I don't even think the consumer can boycott it because at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't actually make ESL their money. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like they do indirectly, but at the end of the day, the real person ESL has to care about is their sponsors, sort of. So if it'd be different if me and you each every year paid the equivalent of like $100 per person to be watching CSGO from ESL, maybe then we could have an effect, Maybe then 20k people together not watching has an effect. I don't know. But in the current world, it seems like we're just wasting our time LARPing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So do you like his? Because I don't know, we're in this weird space where like esports is like still growing, and like the money isn't coming from the consumer to support it, but it's still growing because investors are still thinking it's a good investment to have it grow.
Yeah, for now, sure.
Historically, do you know like other early investment periods, like what people would do or like what consumers? Like what I hear like. The consumers are not monetized at all on like esports. Like everyone gets everything for free. But like somewhere in the future, like you'd want some sort of subscription service at what's coming out, or at least something that the consumer's paying to do something.
The biggest problem I can see that they have at the moment, mate, is that the current strategy for success in the industry is the exact opposite of what you'd do if you ever wanted a pay-per-view model. Like, you wouldn't keep giving people better and better free broadcasts with every bell, whistle, trinket, extra stuff, extra thing. Like, if you do that at the end of the day, how are you ever then going to turn around and go, and now pay me for it? And then the guy's like, what do you mean? Now, last week I had it for free. Like, the reason why I see this as a really difficult problem to solve, and I do think in esports, getting like real money direct from the consumer is like the Gordian knot. You know, the premise that like there was a thing that Alexander the Great had to try and solve that no one could solve. Essentially, I don't think anyone can solve it right now, mate, because the main problem is when I look at the current state of things, like, because the best analogy to me for esports isn't any like sport like soccer or anything. It's actually UFC, because it was like a super niche thing that got pretty big as a niche thing, but then eventually it sort of bridged the gap thanks to the Conor McGregors, the GSPs. It bridged the gap and became mainstream, and now everyone watches it. But here's the key thing, mate. Pay-per-view was always the model of UFC, even from the beginning, even when it was tiny, even when it was getting big. They never put it all on TV for free. If people don't know, the UFC were actually scaled up slower than it needed to, because they purposely turned down a lot of the TV rights deals that they were getting early on because they thought it was too little money. And so even when they would have stuff on TV back in the day, people might remember it would be like The Ultimate Fighter, which isn't the same as UFC. That's like a cut-down version of UFC with lesser fighters who haven't made it yet and blah, blah, blah. So the key thing I think they did with their product was they always like protected the integrity of the idea you had to pay to get the proper fights, like the best quality version of their sport. Whereas because in esports, we've stupidly gone against that premise for a solid 20 years. I think it's going to be really hard now to convince the like current generation that's worth paying, you know? It's going to be so tough. Especially because think about this. The obvious game you'd try it in would be CSGO, right? Because it's such an open circuit. But this is also the nightmare. So you know how I said there, the whole thing the UFC would do is that the free version on TV was either your Ultimate Fighter, which is essentially like a reality series with the equivalent of like tier 4 people, if we're using CSGO terminology. So already it means if you like it, you still have to pay to watch the real fights. But even more so than that, even when they would do a free like fight card, they would purposely put the lesser fighters on it. The other problem we have here is, even if I made a tournament tomorrow that you genuinely would like to pay for, like I have all the best teams, amazing format, great talent. At the end of the day, if you choose not to pay for my tournament and you wait 3 weeks, you can probably watch the same teams play equally as good a tournament in ESL, right, for free. Yeah. So I think it's going to be really hard to figure out, because that makes me feel like we either have to all do it at once or never, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It just seems like esports is gonna like be something very different in how people transition out of this, because like there's no sustainability, right? It's like,
oh, there isn't, no
investment.
Yeah, logically, basically what happens is money comes into esports and then just bleeds out. Like it doesn't make that much now. So yeah, the main problem is, it's why I also call it like the Gordian, not the monetization problem. Because I do feel like someone one day will solve it, and whoever solves it, they will just be like a fucking billionaire. Like they'll get incredibly rich.
Yeah.
It's just who will it be, you know?
It's also, yeah, but it's like, I don't know what the technology goes and what will happen. It's like, well, like the next game, because like esports is in the weird category where like the sport is never consistent.
Well, that's another thing that'll be interesting in the next sort of 5 years, isn't it? Because if you remember, you know this if you're watching leagues in season 3, in the back of most of our minds, most of us thought that things like League of Legends, maybe they'd last 10 years. You know, that would have been a good lifespan. But it's past that now. So if you notice at the moment, I actually get the vibe. I don't know about you. I'd like to get your thought on this as a consumer and a fan. I actually sort of get the vibe now that esports, the really long tenured ones like League of Legends, Dota 2, CSGO, I actually do get the vibe, dude, that they've become a bit like sports. Because, you know, if you follow like the NFL, you just watch the NFL. You're not following the NFL like, look, if this isn't a great season, I'll become an NBA fan. Like, that's not even in your mind. If you like American football, you watch the NFL. I almost feel like those games, CSGO, League of Legends, and Dota, are like that now, where like people are just fans of that game. They're not even just a general esports fan. Like, if someone's a fan of League, as long as they don't totally fuck up the scene and all the big players don't just retire tomorrow, I think most people would watch for the next 5 years. So I actually feel like those games maybe are going to become their own like scene for real. They're not just part of esports, you know.
Yeah, but then you have the whole issue with like they're like the developer will eventually do like, because they have to keep the sport like alive in some
sure,
because you don't have replacement of players, and like eventually the scene will be too small, or like there's not enough good games, or
yeah, sure,
yeah. But like, 'cause, like, there's still like the market of gamers that are playing games, and like, I don't know, because there is tenure, there's consistency. Like League of Legends and CS:GO are like they're games that have been around for a long time. You're gonna have people who know about the game and watch the game professionally.
I also get the vibe. Like, here's the thing I would actually like to ask you about, because I'm not actually a general gamer. Like, one of the weird things about me is I was someone who like had a crazy encyclopedic knowledge like I do of esports in like the 90s about like video games. Like I could tell you like every like Japanese RPG for the PlayStation, or whether like this N64 game came out in America. I can tell you all that shit. But the difference is basically once I got super into esports, that just replaced general single player gaming for me. So one thing I will say is I've also noticed another trend that I think is really weird and isn't spoken about much in esports is there is no next big esports game. Have you noticed that? It's like the big esports are all the same exact esports and people still play and watch them. But then on the side, every year there's a different new, like huge, but flash in the pan game. So that could have been back in the day, it was PUBG type games. Then obviously it was like fucking Among Us and what else? Like Fall Guys. Maybe in the last year it was like Escape from Tarkov or something. It's like there's always some casual game that gets enormous, but if you notice, never seems to transition into an actual like esport. It's just like a flash in the pan, fun for a year, and then people go to the next one. So I almost feel to me like the big esports are different from general gaming now. We've almost separated out.
Yeah, I'm also not necessarily a gamer, but so I never grew up like playing single player games. Like I played the multiplayer games, and once I got into League and like saw that they had the esports going, and I just basically quit gaming for most.
Fair enough.
Like Hearthstone on the side, and that my games are esports and Hearthstone. But that's but like it seems like So I had an esport like these. It's probably just like. Because you have the two MOBAs, which is like started out of the thing, and like MOBAs are like a watchable sport in some sense, and then you have like the bomb plant 5v5.
Sure.
Which like those are like, pretty.
People usually call it tactical FPS. Yeah.
Tactical FPS. Like I don't know if you're gonna, but the rule set and like that setup of game is like pretty driven to be like a sport, and like these other things like. Because what I'm saying, like you can't make a clone like Valorant to CS:GO, and
sure.
like Valorant to be like as big as CS:GO.
No, if you've noticed, that's also another phenomenon that a bunch of us have noticed over the years. Is it's part of why you can't really predict the esports industry. Because if you notice, every single game that becomes like the number one game is almost like what you call like a black swan event. It's like a totally unpredictable thing that comes out of nowhere and takes over everything. So I'll give you an example. If people don't know, Counter-Strike was just a mod of Half-Life, which itself is based on the Quake engine. Well, who the fuck could predict that this mod that's based on another version of, you know what I mean? Like, who could predict that would become number one? And then also, you keep going. League of Legends. Dude, Dota was around years before League of Legends. Just Dota used to be an expressly casual game that you played. It's just something you queue up, you play the game. I mean, back in the day, didn't have the queue system in Dota. You just went on an IRC channel, basically equivalent to like a Discord channel, and just made a little pickup game with people when you'd finished playing other esports games. So that becomes huge, but via League of Legends. Like, the joke is, if you said that type of game was going to become huge, all the people who played those games at the top, like Dota, Hard, they were all hardcore gamers, mate. It's the actual people that made League huge were casual fans, so you could never predict that genre in that way. Like, essentially, imagine saying to someone, see this Dota game people like, it's quite niche. Yeah, just a really watered-down casual version that becomes number one. Like, who the fuck could know that? So every time across the board, like, it's almost like these games, there's not really a plan behind them. And even the people who make them, there's a luck involved as to whether they're big. So it's why no one can really be like the true expert. Like no one, like I couldn't tell you what the next big esports game would be. It's probably some genre I've never even thought of, you know. I mean, I can't even believe, by the way, games like Among Us became huge. Like, it's actually bonkers how huge that game was at one point. Like everyone in the world was playing it.
Yeah. Very unpredictable, yeah. And it just, what do we say, like, how the MOBA thing even came to be a thing, like that's very unpredictable. Like it's crazy. But yeah, so I came from like the Warcraft 3 custom games. Like that was
oh right, fair enough.
Basically my gaming from middle school and high school.
Oh, so you were playing the real Dota All Stars?
I didn't get into Dota because the community was pretty toxic at that point.
Oh, you were just playing custom games in Warcraft 3, right? I see. It was toxic as fuck, by the way. Don't worry about that. It goes without saying. That's why it's also hilarious, by the way, just as an aside, that Riot would come along, make their own version of Dota, and then their entire social philosophy was like, there better not be any toxicity around here, though. It's like, have you ever played one of these games? Like I've always said, like the joke is, I don't actually think League players are more toxic than CSGO players. I think the game is more toxic. Like it's just a much less fun game to play casually, isn't it? Like in CSGO, you can get annoyed at people, but at the end of the day, it's like basketball. Like I'm still taking my shot. You can't stop me. Whereas the analogy in League is, it's like if I'm on the wrong team and pick up basketball and now you're like 4 times taller than me because you got leveled up. You know what I mean? Like I can't have any fun then, can I? Someone else fed you.
Yeah. So just off the top of your head, I don't know if you would know this, but do you know where the Fortnite like one free for all 1 on 100 started? Like,
oh, as in the concept of battle royale.
Yeah.
No, I'm not actually familiar. I don't know where, because I know there was some game before PUBG that was like that type of a game as well. No, I'm not actually sure where that concept came from. The sad thing is, though, that's a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, though. That is a genius idea for a casual player. It's actually a very good idea. Like, essentially, what the PUBG and Fortnite angle captures is actually quite a deep point about esports. A lot of fans won't know this, but in the early days of esports, it was only going on public servers with random people. And so there was no matchmaking. So as a result, like, of course you'd go into servers and you might be the worst there and not get a kill. You might go in one where you're like the god and you just kill everyone. Like, actually that format of just being thrown in a server with, in theory, a random set of peers and seeing who's actually good is actually quite core to esports. It's just the problem is that's basically why it can't be an esport, right? Because it doesn't really, it's still, I've seen some of the things they tried with that format. Like they tried doing the real like massive 100-to-1 type thing like you're saying. That just doesn't work at all because you can't follow the right people. You can't guess who's going to get the kills. I've heard in games like PUBG, what they did is they eventually made it like a 3v3 mode. And there was even all like concepts like you choose where you drop to. So you choose if you drop at the same spot as someone else or away from them. Like, but at the end of the day, the problem with that is that isn't the main version of the game though, is it? So I don't really feel like you can make those games into esports so far. Or at least no one solved the problem with that one. You know, they tried. They tried for sure, man.
Yeah, I was more curious about like if that came from the modding community.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know myself actually.
Yeah. Like,
not sure.
I think, like, I don't know what if like developers and like game stores have like moved away from like player creation as far as I can tell. Whereas like there's not like a hub besides like I guess there's just a hub on like CS Source, like the engine still has modders, right? But like you don't have people like making crazy games and like having that one thing shoot up anymore.
Sure.
Right? I don't think that exists. But yeah, because like the thing is like the fan made stuff is like how you get the ideas to start a lot of the time.
Oh, the whole point is it's not that the game devs are idiots. It's just that, think about this. If the game dev comes up with everything about the premise, the map design, the format, then he's going to have to be a fucking genius. Meanwhile, if instead, like thousands of people just take a shot at it, but crucially, we don't have to take all the fails. We can just take the best ones. Mm-hmm. It's just crowdsourcing, isn't it? Like, yeah, naturally, you're going to find someone out there who has a better answer, you know?
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, if a new esport is going to be like crowdsourced by someone's brilliant idea through the modding community, but I don't know if the modding community is still running and like has a place. I'm sure like there's people who do it, but like I thought it was pretty huge in Warcraft 3, but
it does seem like, put it this way, I do think the most short-sighted thing the game devs have done is it does seem like modern games intentionally try not to let you like mod the game and fucking sort of tinker around underneath for exactly these reasons, sadly. Because unfortunately, even though I think if you argued it correctly, you could actually convince these game devs, like, no, this is how you develop it. The problem they have is this, in my opinion. If you notice, most of the time when someone modded the game and made it genius, it was one of their rival companies who took the game and made the actual one that went retail. So unfortunately, it could feel to a game dev, like by allowing modding, you're just letting someone else sort of take over from you, as it were. But I think that's short-sighted, because in the long run, you might need to take over from someone in the future, if you know what I mean. Like maybe in the future, it's your version of someone's mod of a PUBG type game that will become the next big game. So in my opinion, you've got to sort of give to gain in that scenario. So I think they're a bit silly, those companies, in that sense. They'd be better off just letting it go. By the way, as an aside, if you've watched since season 3, Would you, like, for example, if they do 5 more years, I'm sure it'll be more than 5, but let's say there's 5 more years of this level of League of Legends, are you going to keep watching? Will you be here every year?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of invested in like the European, like
more LEC for you.
Yeah, so like I feel like I'll watch LEC for 5 more years, assuming that like Motto's there and like.
So does it have a vibe to you like an NBA or something like it's a real sport? You just watch that like that's your thing.
Yeah, basically.
Fair enough.
I watch like LEC as a real sport most of the time. I don't like. Eventually, I'm probably like going down to like the system is like 5 games every 2 days. Like they're changing that this year, so
yeah.
Hopefully they'll have like a more.
I mean, hopefully that in itself makes it more interesting, right? The actual concept of having 3 tournaments seems pretty cool. I'm up for that. I'm looking forward to that actually.
But yeah, I think like the league has been like so much of my life. It's kind of like if you play like basketball, like since you're growing up, then you just like you keep watching basketball because that's what you do. Where like I've watched so much of league, it seems like if they're still doing it, yeah, I'll watch it still. Seems interesting.
Yeah, right.
It might be hard on like. I don't think they're changing the game that much anymore. So like if I'm not playing league, it should still be watchable. I think the most part. So
absolutely. Yeah. By the way, if anyone's listening as a random viewer of the episode, it is pretty hard when you're on your own to come up with loads of topics. So it's all right. It's all good. Do you have something else you want to shift to? I've got a question for you. How about this? This is a massive open-ended question. What are your expectations for this split for Doublelift and Perkz in 100 Thieves? What do you think? What would you guess?
Well, I think Bucio has been like super hyped up, and who are the other players on their team? It's like Impact, and who's their jungler?
Let me check. It wasn't Impact, was it? I'm pretty sure they had a different top laner, didn't they? Let me double check.
I don't know, but
let me see.
I think what I'm saying is
their top laner is Tenacity, the jungler is Closer, and then Bucio's the support.
Yeah, so I think that surrounding core seems like as much firepower as like Doublelift and Perkz being like older players better.
Oh, you think it makes up for it?
Yeah.
The fact that they might not be in peak form.
Yeah. So I think they'll probably do pretty good. I don't know, like I haven't watched Doublelift stream and like how good he is currently, but I think Doublelift and Perkz are probably serviceable within the league. And sure. I think Tenacity and Bucio have been like pretty hyped. And then Closer has always been good. So
the thing is, I actually think, I have to say, I was actually, as much as people think I'm like a Bjergsen hater, I'm not. I just think Jensen was better sometimes. I actually was kind of shocked by Bjergsen last year, dude. Like, I sort of got it for the first split, but I kept thinking, like, surely he's going to level up in the summer, though. Like, the idea I don't care whether anyone did vote for him. He was not like an MVP candidate last year. Like, but he is supposed to be. He is Bjergsen. That was actually somewhat shocked that 1 year off sort of like reset his level. Whereas here's the difference. I've seen Doublelift's whole career. I actually predict by at least, I don't know if maybe it'll take the whole split. Dude, I would assume he'll just be one of the best at his role. He just seems like that type of a talent, you know. He'll get back there. I'm just fairly confident of it.
Yeah.
And like I say, he's just done it that many times in his career. Think how many times he just sort of like phoned in or just didn't even play in the spring split and still was good by the time summer came, you know.
Yeah, he's done that quite a bit. Just
kind of his MO, isn't he? He clearly doesn't go 100%. He just levels up as he goes. That's why I was more worried about the Bjergsen angle because, like, first of all, not only was he getting mega paid last year, so everyone can miss me with like, oh, but, you know, he was just coming back from like a year off. Guys, he was probably getting paid the most he ever got paid. But the bigger thing is, Bjergsen is a mega talented player. Normally, he's a very dedicated practice person. That makes me just a bit alarmed that he must have put in mad hours and he's never really got that great. He's just sort of, slightly above average or maybe good sometimes.
Yeah. I wasn't really a big fan of Bjergsen the season before he coached.
Oh, the last one, the season 10. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never really I was never a Bjergsen fan necessarily. I was pretty much on Jensen as well most of the time. I think like people like bring up the Bjergsen like season 5 syndrome, like he was like the best player at that point, but I haven't really.
Oh, he was a stud back in the day, but that was a long time ago now, for sure, yeah. I sometimes think in League especially, people if you have too much longevity, they do forget how many years ago it is. Like, put it this way, if people don't remember, the time when Bjergsen was like absolutely smurfing on all of LCS, that was like back when, like in CSGO, the Brazilians were the world champions. It was like 6-7 years ago, guys. Like, that's a long time in esports. That's a whole career. Because I do think actually the last few years of his career, every year he's gone down a little bit for me. And then obviously drastic drop off now. Like, he wasn't even the player that even people made out he was. Like, as you're saying, back in the day, this used to be the guy who would like lock in a Syndra and just like smash you completely. Now the joke is that he just does comfort picks and just plays safe. He's just a boring mage player. Like, he's actually like sort of like ruined a lot of the fucking vibe that I used to like about that player.
Yeah. But people like, when people saw Bjergsen grow, they said he's like become more of a leader and like more of a coach, but it doesn't seem like his playstyle fits that from season 5. Like, he should be like a solo carry who's not leading.
Yes.
He's a better player.
I know I've promised many times, but one day I will do a video on that topic where the biggest problem I have is essentially what you're talking about. As an individual player, I think he's had an exceptional career, but that whole storyline that he's like a leader, and like, I've seen actually, if anything, evidence of the opposite of that with his whole career. Like, it seems like people just, like, team structure just dies around this guy for some fucked up reason.
Yeah, exactly. The team does not seem to work well when Bjergsen does not.
You know,
is leading, or if he wants to pick a zillion, and he's changing a lot of the team around to do that. And I don't know. I've seen it like the last like 2 years where it does. I don't think Bjergsen was very good the last 3 years with the 1 year off.
Like, it's funny that in this off season, like the FlyQuest roster is the one that's really interesting. That's the one with Impact. That was the one where Papa Smithy made that team with like Impact, Speaker, Vikla from Korea, Prince from Korea, and then Isla as the support. That one's quite a good one. But I actually think the one that's the sleeper was the EG one, mate, where all they did is trade out Impact for Someday. Great side grade there, by the way. No downside to that. And then because Danny can't play anymore, they've got FBI instead. Like, I think that is a banger roster, mate. Because I've always thought FBI was pretty good. So I think that roster could be the champion right there. It's a very good roster. Looks great.
Yeah.
I just can't believe fucking Jensen plays for Dignitas. That's pretty wild, isn't it?
Pretty crazy, yeah.
It's not even that bad a dig lineup, though. It's the one where they've got Armut, Santorin. I'm not sure who Spawn is. And then they've got Ignar as the support. It's a pretty nice group of players. Not bad. Could definitely fuck around with that team.
Yeah, I've been following Cloud9 for the longest time, so I also like the Cloud9 lineup. And I don't know much about it.
The problem is I don't know that much about the mid laner they've signed, though. Like, I watched him very briefly because he was on like one of the better ERL teams, but I'm actually quite shocked that Cloud9 like gambled on him. That makes me think that gambling on him was their way of like cutting costs to some degree this year, because everyone's saying everyone has to downsize. Because I don't know about that, mate. Like, is he really going to be better than Jensen? I don't know about that. That seems like a bit of a gamble. If it works, fair play. I'll give him props, but you know.
Yeah, it's like the hype rookie. I don't know, but I think I've heard that he's been playing for a longer time than a rookie. But I think now that league's been a long, people have played for a while before getting in pro teams. But yeah, so I don't know, like, because it seems like I don't know if Fudge said he didn't want to play mid, but I think if Fudge still played mid, they could have gone like a different top laner at that point, right? But
the problem they have with that whole scenario is I actually think that's the player. If you're a Cloud9 fan, I'll get your take on it. It'd be interesting. I actually think Fudge is the player I'm the least certain about in that team, mate. Because here's the problem. In his first year, he did a pretty good job playing top lane, actually. Then when he went to mid lane, I wasn't a fan of that, mate. Like, in my opinion, I know he didn't do it for that long, but like, that doesn't look like it was going to work long term. And then the big problem I had was when he swapped back to top lane when they got Jensen, I thought he was a bit underwhelming, and especially at Worlds, I thought he did fuck all. So the problem I have with that player is it reminds me a little bit about when Cloud9 used to have Licorice as their top laner. Everyone loved him those first 2 years, but the problem is after that, it's like every split or every year, it just seemed to go downhill a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, to me, it's maybe just to me, but everyone else seems to fucking rate Fudge to the heavens. I know partly because of LS and all that jazz, you know, but like everyone else just seems to rave about this guy. Whereas when I've watched him the last year or so, it's like, he's all right. There's nothing, I wouldn't be like building my team around him or anything. He's just all right, you know.
Yeah, I think what I most
You think he's underrated? Am I missing something?
Well, I think the thing is, like, Fudge, I think, would do great in the LS style of team, where Fudge can like play anything, and willing to do crazy stuff.
Oh, sure. I mean, put it this way, that was why, even though I was against the premise of it, because it is fucking mid lane, that was why I was open to the experiment at least, because as you're saying, it was like, it came with a whole like theme that, yeah, you'd have LS and they'd do weird picks and it would be like fucking all these weird supportive mids and stuff. Yeah, that was an interesting concept for sure.
But yeah, so I don't know like ranking like mechanics wise. I don't think Fudge is the greatest from like other opinions I've heard, but I still like a decent player, and it seems like, I don't know. It depends like where the team wants to go. If Diplex is like a carry, they just play through mid, and what the team wants to do with. I don't know who's coaching them now, but because Max is off.
That's true. Actually, let me check. Who is the coach of Cloud9? Because they did reveal that Max thing like right at the end of the offseason, didn't they?
Yeah.
Let me double check. Who is it? Let me just have a look. Cloud9. Just trying to see if they've signed there. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think they've got one. Oh, I think it says Mithy's the head coach now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I think Mithy is like a meta person to some extent. Like he teaches fundamentals and then like plays the meta. So I think the team is going to be like what I expect from LS, and maybe they'll just do middling, but I don't know. I like the whole experiment with LS, and it's just a bummer that it didn't really work out. But
sure,
mostly because like as a fan of like Cloud9, like mostly like it was like Meteos doing innovative stuff in the jungle back in season 3.
Oh, that's what made you a fan.
Yeah. And that kind of style, and like Sneaky was never like the best, but he played the Casio in like season 7, and
sure,
like I like the innovation that they did. So we'll see what they do this year.
What about an LEC? Is there anyone, if you're a LEC fan, is there anyone's really exciting you with the off-season moves there?
Yeah, I think the new Jankos lineup, it's like Jankos and Evie. I don't know what team they're on, but
that was on the Heretics one that bought the spot from Misfits or whatever it was.
Yeah. They have Jack Spector on that one.
Yeah.
He's pretty hyped. He should be a good addition to the LEC. And like Evie, like from what do you know, the stuff that one Japanese guy, not the guy Namira, there you go. Namira,
yes, there you go.
Evie is like he plays also very innocently. Like the thing like Namira said, like he'll deny his own CS to make you lose CS. Like so he does like sometimes like the crazy level 1 trades where like he misses 3 CS, but you're missing 3
yes.
You don't have a level on him at that point. I think that like that kind of style of play is probably going to be cool to see. And like maybe that'll work to some extent. And like maybe Jankos and Evie will do some cool things.
Sure. I actually think some of the LEC rosters are really interesting. Like to me, I'm going to do a video on it soon, but I think XL fucking smurfed this offseason, mate. What an amazing fucking team they managed to put together. That's the one where they got Odoam there, Cersei, Vethio, Patrick, and Targamas. That's ridiculous. Like basically every one of those players is in contention for best at their role. And they're a fucking XL. That's so crazy in off-season. Is who?
Xerxes? I thought he was kind of falling off still.
No, he played for Astralis, mate.
He was on Astralis last year.
Yeah, if you remember, Astralis was the team that like had Vizicachi, who was like fucking just come back from me retired, so he was whack. And then their mid laner was that like Dayjaw guy from Germany who was just whatever. And then Kobe was the ADC, which was like, fair enough, Kobe's all right. And then it was basically that like Yonghoon guy, the Korean support, who was like, it was him and Cersei basically carried that team. And like, I thought Cersei did a very good job. He was probably like the 3rd best jungler for me. So that's a pretty good one.
Like Immortals before that, right?
He had a bad year in NA, but like that's happened to a lot of good European players, to be fair. So I think the XL one's a banger. I'm really unsure about the Fnatic one because I have no idea how the bot lane works. So I'll have to wait and see on that one. I think I can't believe still that G2 did that move with Jankos and got the Yike guy. Because I'll even tell you, based on what I've heard behind the scenes, I don't think they got anywhere close to the money they even wanted for Jankos. I think that actually might end up being a bad move. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that guy ends up being a stud. I actually think an interesting one to me is the Vitality one. Because if people don't know, the story is the Photon guy who's coming as the top laner, in theory, I think that's only for spring. I think, like, in theory, Alfari, like, chose to sit a split out and could come back next split. But the rest of the team looks mega. Like, obviously, everyone wants to see this Bo guy play. But even beyond that, like, Perkz was already fucking stud. Neon was mega last split and probably the last 2 splits. And Kaiser, I've always thought was, like, he, in my opinion, Kaiser, Targamas, and Trimby are the future of fucking support in Europe. Like, they're the players that are going to be the Mithy, Yellow Star, and, you know, Hillersang of their era, you know. They all just look mega.
Yeah. Do you have any info on this Shigenda guy? Because he came back into LEC.
I remember when he first came in, yeah, which was weird, but they did seem like in Vitality they really misused him and didn't know how to play him. So, like, basically, I heard there was, like, in theory, justified hype around him when he first came in. I think he probably was just on the wrong team, or maybe it took him a while to power up. I don't hate the idea you're trying him here. All I hate is just the idea you replaced Odo Amne. Like, mate, like, I can't have one more split to see if they go back to back. Like, what is that? You know? So we'll see on that one. Maybe that gamble works. Who knows? Not impossible. It's just he's not going to be Odo Amne, is he? He's going to be a different type of player.
Yeah.
That is the only bomber for me, though. It's like the only 2 things I didn't like was the Yike for Yankos one and removing Odo Amne. Like, if you had all the same lineups, but those 2 would be very interesting. If they had their real original players, you know. Are you a Reckless fan, by the way? You're allowed to be, by the way. I'm not like against people who like him. It's cool that he's come back to LEC at least.
He's been hyped, and, like, I thought he was, like, a good ADC and stuff, but I was never, like, a fan, or, like, I didn't watch Fnatic because of Reckless. I watched Fnatic because of, like, So.
Fair enough.
And Whippo.
Which ones are you most hyped about these rosters then?
I know. I think Vitality is also a pretty hype one. I do want to see what Bo does and how that works. Probably the Wonder Humanoid still has potential. We'll see how
sure.
But losing Odwamne does make, like, the Rogue Koi thing less interesting. Yeah, probably Vitality. XL, as you said, is also good. Vitality, XL, and
does also just kill me inside that Upset's not even going to be playing for anyone. That's just gross.
Yeah, that's
what the hell? You know?
Because, like, I don't know, he was just, like, negotiate, like, the timing of Fnatic hiring Reckless back, like, probably just messed with him or something. I don't know.
Oh, it's fucked up.
What happens, but yeah, I think it's probably just something like contract and issues that he couldn't get out easily. But yeah, like, it's likely someone's going to pick him up, because
I hope after the first split or whatever it is, someone does it, you know. Yeah. That's actually also an upside to the new LEC format. In theory, it means people, you would hope, will figure out way earlier on if their lineup's not good, you know. Whereas, like, you have to wait, like, what is it, 9-10 weeks before you even play your first playoffs if you get there. So I do think the old circuit was really bad at letting you know if your team's actually good or not. It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. And we have, how many best of 3s? It's a single round robin, and then it's, like, all best of 3s and 5s after that.
It goes, like, I think it does, like, you have the one initial phase, then you, like, get put into, like, GSL groups or something. I think that's what happens. And then after that, it's like X amount of teams make it to the playoffs. Probably half or something, I'm guessing.
But yeah, that also is, like, pretty huge. Like, LEC gets a bunch more best of series.
Sure.
Watching those will probably be more interesting than, like, the 5 games a week.
Oh, I think it'll be way better, yeah. Especially once it gets to these groups. Like, it's going to be baller.
Yeah, GSL is pretty good, pretty awesome.
There's not really any downside to it, basically. As long as you seed it properly. I mean, they're not going to do that, but don't worry. It's still better than Swiss system, put that way. Don't worry about that. Is there anything else in leagues got your attention at the moment?
Well, okay, so I was just talking about GSL. So I also watched StarCraft 2 for a bit when.
Oh, fair enough.
And, like, the best of 7 and, like, how people are able to cheese in RTS and stuff. And, like, the people, like, explore the meta a bit more, like, because, like, you have some cheese style in League. Like, the underdog teams did that a lot in, like, Vietnam and stuff. And, like, you know, like, I don't know, like, is there, like, cheese? Is that a viable option in League? And think if they're like people like you catch someone off guard, it's just like Riot. I think Riot has like put that down a bit in the recent years, but like I like to see it happen. I think like best of 3 also allows for like more strategic planning.
Put it this way, I definitely do think, like you're saying, I mean, obviously the VCS teams are the best example. I do think cheese is actually underused in League of Legends, because if you notice, this ties into my famous eternal quest to destroy global meta thinking, is I think the problem I think in League of Legends, mate, is this. Even like the 89th best team in the world just looks at the best Korean and LPL teams and goes like, what are they doing? And how can I play like them? It's like, even if you play like them, you're not going to beat them, are you, mate? You're the 89th best team. So what I would do instead is, I would obviously play a normal style against my peers, like the 90th best team and the 75th best team. But if I'm ever playing like a team that's way above my level, it's like you're saying, I would have some really extreme cheeses. Because if people remember, Gam had some, they did one, I remember at like season 7 Worlds, I think. Dude, they had one where they did like a lane swap in an era when like lane swaps didn't even exist, and they just forced it as like some crazy move. Like, if you're really a nobody playing against like Kingzone or some like top LCK, you probably should do some shit like that. Like, that actually might be a chance to win. Whereas if you just play out a normal laning phase, normal draft phase into team fights and like skirmishing, they're probably just going to eat you alive, aren't they? So I do think that's a bit underused. It's because it's just not as obvious as in StarCraft. Like, you can very obviously cheese, can't you? So I think people essentially, what they won't do, in my opinion, is they won't commit to it. So you know how in StarCraft, if you try like a really extreme cheese, like just 6 pool or something, if it doesn't work, you know you lose the game. I think that's what people can't handle in League of Legends. They can't handle the idea if the cheese fails, the game's over. It's like, well, yeah, but that's the whole point. You're increasing the variance and going for a really all-in strategy. So, like, I think their problem is that, yeah, but what if our level 1 doesn't work and we don't get the kit? It's like, well, then you weren't going to win anyway. So, like, just commit to it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I like the style where, like because it's a 1v1 game, you know, like when you lost and stuff. So I would enjoy an alternate timeline where like if League was always best of 5 and people would allow surrenders and you'd have
right, I see what you mean.
More variety happening and you'd more trials and errors. But like 5v5 team was like, oh, we can do the comeback. Oh, we can come back, and like,
oh, no one will ever surrender in League. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true. In fact, if people don't know, in the old days of season 2 and season 3, that even used to be a famous sort of like status symbol. If the other team actually did a surrender vote in a pro game, it implied like you were just beating them so hard even they surrendered. Like, that was so rare, but if it ever happened, it was like considered baller, you know. In the modern day, no one will ever do that though. Everyone just hang on till bitter end, won't they?
Yeah.
Just pray you win somehow.
Yeah. So I was watching the Perkz reflections.
All right.
And the Perkz at the ADC, and this also comes into like the weird drafts and stuff. Like when they beat Origin, that was like probably my favorite best of 5 ever. And so like, what do you think like made Perkz such a good like ADC? And like, was it like, cause he said like it was Xayah and like Kai'Sa were like the champs in the meta at that point. Like they weren't necessarily ADCs in the most traditional sense. And then he was able to play mages as well. And like, I just think like Perkz as an ADC was really cool.
Sure.
See more of that.
I mean, I will say, what you just said at the end there is sort of what I know a lot of experts believe, and I think it's got some logic to it, which is of all the years to switch, in some fucked up way, he sort of picked the perfect one, where, as you say, there was a couple of very strong champions at his role that were basically always picked. Secondly, some of the counters were fucking mid lane mages he already played due to being a mid laner. And then on top of that, luckily for him, there were none of the new champions. Like, he didn't do it when Aphelios had come out and Senna and all these. Like, if everyone remembers, even people like Doublelift were fucked up. Forgiven was having a hard time with those champions. Like, those were so different. So, like, yeah, I agree with you. There were a lot of factors that sort of played in his favour. But I will say this, and this one factor is legit if you think about it. The last split that Perkz played as ADC, when he played the summer split of 2020, you might remember was the one that began, a lot of people forget this, where his dad actually died, like around the beginning of the split, if people remember. And famously, I think even maybe like didn't practice for the first few weeks. And so at the beginning of the summer split, that was the one where G2 was mega dodgy. They themselves almost didn't make it into the playoffs. You remember with like this Schalke miracle run period, they were like one of the teams hovering around not making playoffs. It's like he actually had to like play himself into form as the split went on because he was dealing with like external stuff. And if you ever watch that split that is the split where you can tell he hasn't practiced at the beginning. His level's way lower. But by the end of the split, he's getting like half decent. And that was, if you remember, when like Ash was the meta champion that everyone was playing, and Caitlyn and shit like that. And by the time he gets to Worlds, he's actually at a good level again. So that actually also makes me think he's not only a talent, but I imagine he has like a very good work ethic and sort of understanding of how to level his game up. Because that part actually made me think maybe he could just be an ADC in any era. Maybe he's just a sort of winner that has just the mind to sort of adapt. So that impressed me a lot. But I do think he had some advantages that we didn't know at the time when he did it, you know.
Yeah.
Plus, I also think the problem with that role, when you compare the two roles, ADC and mid, is like, do you, by the way, do you follow any real life sports? Do you follow like American football or basketball or something?
Yeah, primary is NFL.
Right, I'll give you the American football analogy then. The problem I think with the ADC role is it's like being a really good running back. It's like, at the end of the day, you don't actually get to choose whether you make amazing runs that get loads of yards. Like, you need like the right call to be made, when to do it from the defense. You need the fucking blockers to block for you. You need a little bit of luck too. You got to get through a hole, you know. Like, if you do all those things, you dominate the game. You'll look like, wow, oh my God, like 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. What a great game. It's like, but you need other people to help you do that, you know. Whereas there are other roles in sports where you can be a lot more selfish. Like, obviously, like shooting guard in basketball is probably the best example. Like, your team could play like shit and lose the game, but you could get all your shots off and score 40 points. So to me, the problem with mid and ADC is mid lane's more like I said about the shooting guard. Like, the mid laner in general, if he's godlike, can probably do mostly whatever he wants. ADC, I think that's the problem. No one will ever want to be ADC if they could be mid, in my opinion. It's just the feeling of being in control as a mid laner is going to be so much more. The agency is going to be so much more. At all points of the game, you can be effective. ADC really is a bit like on the rails where it's like, you know, until you get to these items at this point in the game and your team has to be in a certain point. It's like, I can see why it would be really unsatisfying as a role if you had the choice between the two, you know. I don't blame him for switching back, Brat Ware.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Like, I think it said in the interview, like, you have to wait for your team to let you carry.
Exactly.
And that's just like super frustrating if you're like, from the start of the game, a mid laner can do it.
Sure. Yeah. And probably always will be able to if you just look at the way the game's worked, you know?
Yeah.
Like, as much as people tell me there's metas where mid lane isn't that important, they feel like they last a month, if you know what I mean. Like, it's most of the history, the mid lane. I mean, you can even say it for the Worlds now. Like, even last Worlds, mid lane probably still the most important role, if you look how everyone played.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just the way the map is and the champions are, that mid lane should always be the most important.
Thing is, though, even though people are going to think this is an outrageous statement, because obviously I don't mean just my part, like, that fucking Perkz Reflections might be, like, contender for one of the best interviews I've ever done. It was a banger, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was terrific. Perkz is an incredible player too. So
he's also just a guy, if you notice, like, he's quite articulate. He's sort of mastered how to tell you stories that have like spicy elements without making everyone sound too bad in them, if you know what I mean. He's quite a good conversationalist, I'd say.
Yeah,
he did a good job.
He has that reputation with poaching, so you got to be good at talking and networking, right?
For real, yeah.
So it's the Vitality team. I don't know, like, what personality of like Bo, but do you have any, like, what's your over under on this team, like, exploding and like not working?
The problem I have with this team is I feel like it will either be really good, like it'll be an absolute lock for top 2, if not the best, which is, I assume, if the ball guy goes absolutely supernova as like an MVP candidate. But I also feel like if it doesn't work out and there's like, say he's like totally misaligned, like maybe he does all these like psychopath ganks, but doesn't work with the player he tried with, or there's something wrong with the shot. I could also see a world where they're just like this 5th best team and they're just in the playoffs and that's it, you know?
Yeah.
Because to me, that's the problem when you sign players like that, is you sort of gambling. You're going for high risk, high reward, you know?
But yeah, like, it's like unprecedented what Bo did in LPO. And it's like, some of that has to like come through.
Oh, put it this way, I don't blame them for trying. Like I'll give you an example, right? If it was me, yeah, I'd probably just be boring and try and buy Yankos and just pair him with Perkz again. That just seems like a slam dunk thing you could try, you know. But as I say, in theory, there's maybe even an upside to the ball player, because he was, for real, if people never saw his brief time in LPL, it did look for real like he could be a phenom. Like, legitimately would have been like a contender for best jungler in the world if it had continued, you know. So, like, the idea that the best jungler in the world could play in Europe with Perkz, like, that's a pretty sexy fucking premise. So, I don't blame him for trying, you know.
Yeah.
Like, if it works, it's going to be incredible, obviously.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some bow pop-ups in the first couple of weeks then.
And also, if he plays really, really well, I think it'll probably have a massive impact on how all the other junglers in LEC play. So it could be a revolution. We'll see. I will say the comms part is what I'm worried about, mate. So you've got a Korean top lane, a Chinese jungler, and then other people are European. Like, we'll see if you can make that work. Let's see. The other thing people don't notice, by the way, because obviously no one ever brings up coaches, is they also changed coach. And what they did is, I don't know if you noticed this, but the guy who was Neon's coach in Misfits, that Coach Carter guy we had on Summoning Insight, he is now the Vitality coach. That's very interesting because that guy, as far as I can tell, I think it was the coaching staff that made that style of play that team played in the front-to-back team fights and how they drafted. Like, that guy did seem to do a very good job in Misfits. So give him, like, much better talent. I'm very interested to see how that goes. And you've got Perkz anyway, so it's not like you have to, like, win everyone over. And, like, you've got Perkz, mate. As long as you just do a good job, I feel like you've got a good chance.
Yeah. Did Neon play a whole lot of, like, tertiary carry at all?
Did who?
Neon. Because he was a Misfit player, right? ADC.
He was, but the problem in Misfits is that was just like the Vethio and Neon show, if you remember. So they used to intentionally draft that way. That's why they got that irrelevant guy for Hirit, so they could just have him play like Sion or whatever the fuck top lane, you know. So the problem is, my implication with that team, by the way, is that it will be an ADC mid-team.
Okay.
It just seems logical, because why else would you get Neon? Like, he was just amazing if you'd put him as a proper carry. And then also, you've already got Perkz anyway. And if you look in Europe, like, you can definitely play mid in ADC. That's still a good way to set a team up.
Yeah, I don't know. So, because there are teams. Well, this is whatever Konami's team is. Like, there's teams that play around jungle, right?
Sure.
So I think if you can play mid jungle as carries, and you can play like Neon as the tertiary, if he could convert to that, I think that would be interesting and cool to watch.
I mean, I imagine he could. It ties back into the ADC conversation. Like, technically, every ADC is tertiary until they get online and get into a team fight anyway, right? So, probably. Just depends if they smash lane. We'll have to see what him and Kaiser are like. The thing for me that's exciting is, at least when he was paired with a good mid laner, Kaiser looked really good in Mad Lions, in my opinion, back in the day with Humanoid. So, if he can play like that with Perkz, and then Bo's good as well, like, mate, jungle mid support is pretty much the way Europe wins the last few years. That's what you want on your team, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Just bangers at those positions. Maybe they've got the best if it all works out. It's potential, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, as a random aside, it won't be great for you because the time will be garbage. But in theory, this season, we will actually do Best Damn League Show, the one I do with Dom about LEC. We'll actually do that live this season. Won't change anything, but we're just going to just try doing a couple of other shows live as well, you know, just see how it goes.
Yeah. I'm a pretty things job right now, so I can watch podcasts. So that should be.
It doesn't matter for you then, but yeah, it's just something we're going to do.
Exciting. That's cool.
That's a fun show to do, though. Because I actually do enjoy having like a region. It's a region I watched anyway, where it's like, it gives you an extra reason to watch. You're not just watching for the pleasure of the game. You're also watching to have like a take and update your thoughts. And it's actually quite fun doing those shows. Like, it sort of makes you figure out your opinion on every aspect of the league, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
I quite enjoy it. And I think that's just one of the ones that, again, if you notice, what I do is I try a lot of different people, but once I find like good rapport, I just stick with those people. So me and Dom's just an obvious fucking duo in it. It's just working well.
Yeah. That's pretty good together.
And if you saw, a bit like we did on Summoning Insight, where we did another one with Monty, where we like ranked classic, we'll probably get Dom on a few more of those. Because I also think that has a legs to do loads of stuff. Like, we should just do every big topic, shouldn't we? Like, best fucking mid laners of all time. We could do all the big topics, basically. Because the real problem with those topics is they actually haven't been done much in League, if you notice. Like, a lot of people don't remember this. I did an article at the end of 2014. It was like the top 20 players of all time or whatever. Has anyone even done one since then? I don't think anyone's ever attempted it. It's kind of whack, if you think about it, right? Where the fuck is it, you know?
Yeah.
So I want to do that content, basically.
I don't even know who makes it.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? The real reason as well is there's so many years of League now. That's why Dom's a good pick, because Dom and Monty have watched all of League of Legends like me. So there's not that many people, unfortunately, that you can actually get to do it. Because even the people that I would say should be on the panel, Kelsey, Emily, like Kelsey doesn't even work in content anymore. And then I don't even know I don't even know if Emily wants to do content. Like, who the fuck knows, right?
Yeah.
That's the downside, unfortunately, of being in an esports game that's about casuals. Like, there's a lot of turnover of talent as well.
Mm-hmm. So I was watching some of the Crackdown earlier with you guys. You guys swapped back to, or like roles again, back for Best Damn League show. Like, what was your thought process behind that, and like, has it worked out?
As in, why Dom was like the host of Crackdown, and I was like, I'm the host of Best Damn League show. You mean?
Yeah. And like, you no longer do Crackdown as like an interview show because you shifted to a
like, basically the main problem is this. And if you know my content, I don't mind talking inside baseball stuff. Like, it's all good. I'm not going to tell any secrets. Like, basically the main problem was, since the Crackdown was a show, like a lot of content about having like large viewership and presence and all that, if you notice, we largely just went for the biggest name guest we could. That was largely the way the show worked. That's why the majority of the guests are players, right? I don't normally take that approach on my shows. I use it like a sort of balance. Like, I'll have a huge guest. I'll have like LS or something like that on. But then in the next episode, I'll probably have on something like Jensen Goh, some smaller content creator you haven't heard of, or some coach that I think's good, but maybe doesn't have a profile. I just have people on for the convo I want to have. Whereas I think Dom's approach more was he wanted really big names. But the downside you'll find if you do that is it's impossible. Like, the biggest names by definition are the hardest to schedule and to get to come on the show, and will turn down last minute or say, yeah, I think I could do that. And then like night before, like, oh, sorry, actually I'm screaming. Then like that's the problem. So first of all, you're going to have a lot of frustrations and weeks you miss because the schedule didn't align. Whereas the difference is you don't know this, but that sometimes happens to be on some of the insight. But the difference is if the guy tells me the night before, I can't do it tomorrow, there's someone like Rich's Wrath or Jensen Goh, someone else who's a smaller guy who's going to say yes and going to be able to jump in last minute for me. On the Crackdown, we didn't really do it that style because it was more like, does Dom want to talk to this person? So it limited the guests. And so the only downside was once we'd done a few years of it, well, like a full year and a half or whatever, we'd just gone through a lot of the names, if you notice. Like, by the end, we were just getting smaller people. So unfortunately, just the premise wasn't working as well. Whereas I knew, and it's sort of borne out, you could have a show without any guests with just me and Dom, but given Spikes he takes on a league, in this case LEC, that's interesting in itself. So I would have been fine doing Crackdown again, but I can see why it didn't really fit the original premise of what we came up with. And then in terms of why we swapped roles, I mean, it's not something we like had in like massive sit down convo about, but personally, I would say I'm the better host. I don't think that's a fucking outrageous statement. I think I'm just better than most of these people hosting podcasts. I've got mad reps in, haven't I? But that's also because I've done it for so many years. So the thing is, on the Crackdown, cause Dom, it was on his stream, it was his content, I'll let him host that and never even had the conversation, because to me it was like, I don't know if this is why I'm speculating, but I think he wanted to learn the skill set of being a host and sort of level up. And crucially, because on a show like that, he didn't have the same experience I do with hosting, I wanted him to host in the sense that he always gets to go first with his take, with his question, so that he gets his out there and then I can fill in all the gaps, as it were. So if like it gets to the point where I can see the guy's not responding to his questions, maybe I crank up the humour knob and I start being silly and entertaining and telling stupid anecdotes and arguing with the player or something. So I think I was more sort of like the assist man, as it were, on Crackdown, whereas on the other show, Dom's the star, isn't he? Like, Dom is the guest, as it were. He's the main person you're listening to. So I think it just makes more sense on Best Damn League show for me to be the guest and to set him up, as it were. Yeah. That was the way I thought about it, at least. He might think differently. Who knows?
Sure. So, I don't know, another historical point. I don't know if you have any answers or if there's like statute of limitations here. Like, do you know any information on like the Mickey X wrist issue and like what happened with that and why it's no longer a thing?
As in, he was supposed to have like RSI or something when he was in G2, but they left, and then now he's back in G2 again.
Like, well, I hear like his RSI thing just like went away.
Oh no, dude, I'd forgotten this myself. Yeah, and when you say that, because obviously on the Crackdown we talked about it, didn't it? You mean where he actually said that mad shit, like in the first season with G2, he had this problem, but then he like read a book and then it like healed his hand or something. Yeah. The problem with that one is I haven't heard like the actual real detail. As far as I know on that one, I would imagine it was just a mixture of giving it a little bit of rest and doing some exercises. Because if you notice, the main problem with RSI type injuries isn't the injury. It's that they can never get like 2 months without playing to take time off and rest it, right? So in my opinion, I think people massively underestimate how much doing the exercises on your wrists can help. Because I'll tell you what, I don't know about you, but from my own personal experience, I've played games a long time. I do sometimes get it where my wrists will ache or they'll feel tight or something. And what I do is when I get the feeling, I look up online, I go to YouTube, I type in like wrist exercises, RSI, gaming, whatever videos there, I click it, I watch it. I do whatever exercise for 5-10 minutes. And there's two factors here. One, I've noticed most people don't actually listen to the instructions. So the guy shows you, like, do this stretch. But then what you don't listen to is he nearly always will say something like, for 30 seconds. And what someone does is they do it for 3 seconds and they go, nah, it didn't really help. It's like when you do those stretches, first of all, the reason you have to hold it for 30 seconds is when you're doing the stretch properly with like tension, dude, after 5 seconds, you'll start to feel a feeling, like a sensation. After like 20, you'll want to stop. But when you make yourself go to 30, it gives the proper like range of motion stretch. Like you've had enough time to put the force in. Like, so first of all, I don't think people do the exercises right. So I think most people who think it's uncurable are wrong. And then here's the bigger issue is that in my opinion, most people probably do what I do, which is I only remember to do the exercise once it hurts. You know what I mean? So if I had to guess, I'll actually ask him about this, but I'll try and find out for you. But I'd be interested to know myself. I would suspect he probably just found out a bunch of techniques that you do that sort of relieve the tension. And he just realized if you just do them regularly, over time, it's actually going to undo the damage, as it were. Because I don't know if you know this, but most injuries like that are causing you pain is just because people are doing gaming movements, which are the equivalent to doing like, basically, it's a bit like, you know, at the gym, people try to do it. So you do an exercise that's essentially the opposite to the one you just did to like unload that muscle, as it were. It's like if you never did the latter one, all you ever did was do like a squeezing motion with your hand. Eventually, yeah, your hand's going to be like a fucked up like claw that's all gripped in and you can't undo it because you haven't done the opposite motion to like balance it out, as it were. So the real problem is most of those exercises are just like about doing the opposite to like let the tension go. And as far as I can tell, the majority of pros not only don't know about this shit, but they only do it like I did, like sort of lazy style. Like once it hurts, you start doing it again. It stops hurting, so you stop doing it. If you're actually a true pro, you should probably do those exercises every week, no matter what, you know. So I would suspect he probably just found something like that worked for him, you know. That'll be my guess. It's an interesting topic, though. I will say, you're right. That was a massive topic, and then it did just die. No one ever even brings it up anymore. I actually haven't heard that asked in interviews in years. Yeah. Because it is wild when you think how good he was last year at Excel. Like, someone should ask about that.
Yeah. We'll find out. So other transfer topic. So end of podcast questions. Like, what has been your experience with that? And like, were there good questions that a lot of the same people, like from earlier by the numbers, you get like the pun questions, and sometimes like.
Oh, you mean like sort of like Patreon or like viewer question type things?
Yeah, viewer questions at the end of like the last Free Nation content now. Like,
here's the thing, mate. Doing that approach has actually convinced me, along with my Discord, that having a paywall is the way to go. Because I don't know about you, mate, but if we really did just take those questions out of Twitch chat, I think the quality would be appalling. Whereas I actually have to say, I think the questions on By the Numbers, Summon the Insight, and Four Horsemen, etc., I think those are pretty good questions in general. Like, as you say, there's the ones where it's long-time fans who do, like, just sort of joke questions, aren't real questions. Some of those are pretty funny. Like that Carve guy on By the Numbers. It's the joke is that his question could be a joke I would make on the show. Like, his questions are pretty good. You know, like he knows all the theme about Nicola Nyholm and fucking Doublelift and Reggie or whatever, you know. He knows all the drama. And then I would also say, because you have to pay to like access the ability to do the question, I just think the level of the questions is a lot higher. Like, you notice on By the Numbers, or I would say especially like Four Horsemen, we often get questions that are actually quite like philosophical in nature and lead to like very interesting open-ended discussions. Like, I'm actually quite impressed by them. I think they're pretty good.
I realized with like when Monty's on, he get different questions, and
yeah, they also seem to tailor them quite well to my co-host, don't they? Yeah. Yeah, great.
Normally when I ask questions like esports related, but do you feel like the philosophy questions and like things you like answering, and like fun.
The funny thing is, I actually think people don't realize those are probably the best questions you can ask. Because think about this logically. If I really knew who's going to team X or what team Y should do with their sniper situation or how drafting's best done, I'm probably going to already mention it on the content. Like I'm a content creator, like I'm putting that shit out there. So there are some good questions you can ask, but it's going to be a lot harder to find like an amazing question about esports or League of Legends. Whereas the difference is my logic goes like this. Like, if you notice, some of the people I have as my co-hosts are just really interesting people, flat out. Forget just the esports. Like, Monty's a super interesting character, Richard, Semler, they're all from such different backgrounds that, like, I actually think asking them a non-esports question is usually the most interesting. Like, which is really more interesting? Like, who does Richard think the next good esports journalist is? Or, like, what's a novel that Richard read when he was a teenager that's transformed his life? The latter's a way more interesting question if you know who Richard Lewis is. You know what I mean? So in my opinion, the reason why the questions also got better is because not only have people heard a lot of our opinions, but in the modern day, I think a lot of the people who ask the questions are more like fans of us as personalities than just the game, as it were, you know?
Yeah.
Because I actually think the non-esports ones are usually the most interesting. With the exception of that weird... I don't know who it is who asks the questions, but you know, there's like one guy who seems to every episode of Something Insight ask Monty, like, and then in chapter 2 of writing a novel 101, how would you structure like an antagonist? You know, there's a guy who always asks those questions. Like, those ones are maybe a bit too far for me.
Yeah. I think, because I don't read the Discord questions, so I don't think Monty ever or says them aloud at that point. So
I don't think he says the name of who asks the questions, the thing.
I don't know. I think maybe you dramatize that how he said it, but I mean I don't think I've ever heard that style of question.
There's been loads on Somebody Insight, mate. You'd have to go and look at the end. There's some bad ones.
Yeah.
Is there one last topic? Is one last thing you want to hit?
Yeah, the last one. If you want to go back to content about box drop, so how is side select and like how is box drop host and like do you like his the weekly food question and is that interesting because like that's like
oh by the way that ties in perfectly what we were just talking about. Here's the funny thing, I like every pleb probably thought like 3 episodes in like, oh, is this the gimmick? Is he just going to ask someone about food every time? But then I realized along similar lines, because that's a show where all the people on the show have really good rapport and chemistry, and all of those people are interesting as well. Like, even if you didn't know who Rich's Wrath is, he's clearly a very unusual guy in real life who's lived a very different life to other people. Like, he's got his own total perspective on things. So I actually think the joke is that's a perfect example, because that didn't just become like a silly gimmick. It's actually quite a good way to like break the ice at the beginning of the show, if you notice. What he's sort of backdoored his way into there, if you think about it, Matt, is, you know, back in the day, every one of my shows, I didn't used to start like, right, welcome to the show, the guest is X and Y. I would always start, but like as if it was like, hadn't even started, like a casual thing, like, anyway, we're here, I don't know about this guy. And I immediately start roasting the guest or making jokes or talking about some other thing. And the reason I used to do that is because I wanted to start out by like breaking all the like weird awkwardness down, break the ice, get all the like social conventions out the way, make people start talking, having rapport, laughing, and then I would start the show essentially. Essentially, I think his food question just does that in a formal way. Because you already have to answer something a bit silly because he's asking you about like what your favourite breakfast is or something, isn't he? So I think it starts you off in the right mood, in my opinion. I think he's mega. I actually think for real, like it's an opinion that Rich himself has said on that show. But if LEC was smart, Foxtrot would be one of the hosts, in my opinion. He's just got a really good, like his ability to form rapport with people seems really good. And he's a really entertaining guy. Very good. Seems to have a very nice personality.
Yeah.
Are you a fan? You like him?
Yeah, I like him. Like the content's good. It's like, I mean, Foxtrot fills the role as a host. He's like doesn't take a lot of space on Rich and you. So
the funny thing is, he could if he wanted to. Like I'd be totally up if he wanted to give more answers himself. But yeah, he seems to reserve himself a little bit. But it's all good. I think it's a great show, mate.
Yeah, it is a good show. I liked it.
Like that's one of those ones where I had no clue coming in if it'd be any good. Like the premise sounded a bit whack. It actually ended up being pretty good. Like I think whatever the concept Rich had was, it's actually, I think it's a banger. It's worked out pretty well. And again, one unusual, like you wouldn't necessarily put the three of us as like the right combo, but it actually works pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
Should we just cut it there? Does he have anything else?
One quick one, like
go on.
What's your plans on Stratbook? You putting anything else out?
There will be more episodes of that. The main problem with that is, if people don't know, Legia full-time works in Valorant now. He's the coach of like the second best team in like Singapore or some region like that. I'm not actually 100% sure. Indonesia, one of those two. Yeah, so the problem is, obviously, most of his time, I mean, he even sometimes lives over there, is working on Valorant, but because he's someone who's lived Counter-Strike, and yeah, he's not watching every game, but he's watching the big tournaments, the major and all the massive ones, he still is in the game. The key thing for that, in my opinion, basically is, I still want Legia to be the co-host. Now, he's obviously not going to be at his absolute peak, but most of the stuff on that show is like abstract. It's about like sort of things you learn over the last 10 years thinking about Counter-Strike. So I still think that show could easily run with him. And I do have a couple of people lined up who are big names who I still plan to bring on it. So don't worry, there will be more episodes of that show. That's one of my favorites as well. Yeah.
The episode with Rajcula was very interesting. And lots of interesting topics from his perspective.
I genuinely think that's another one of my shows that's like a mad sleeper. Like, I think that one's one of my best ones, mate. Almost every episode's had very interesting angles and things I didn't know myself about the player or the coach or the whatever, you know. Now, I'm a baller, a visionary, and a hard worker, so you can imagine I'll always get by in esports. But at the same time, I very much appreciate the people who support me, such as Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Tosh, Bot Pounder 420, Animosity, Thorin, Tobias Bernasconi, Kovacevicd, Jensen Goh, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest that will appear in my content? Do you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA? Maybe you want teasers, find out who the upcoming guests are for some reflections or interview content. Or do you want to be one of those nerds asking me questions, talking about the old days and new things and all those long, lengthy, topical discussions that I do? Well, if any of those tickle your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.